Could you give us an example of a person who was doing it really well and what you borrowed from there?
I would say early on at Snowflake, I think we lacked some maturity with respect to the corporate messaging. In part, hey, we were branded as a data warehouse, which has evolved into a data platform, and then the data cloud, which is more strategic than the public infrastructure cloud. And then we always talked about our results for customers in the context of faster query times. That puts you in a conversation with a certain user or buyer different than when you're talking about revenue, cost, risk, things that organizations want to invest in. And so early stage, I can think of one seller in particular. His name is Evan Blake. And Evan had a ton of experience. He's a 20-year software sales veteran, success everywhere that he goes, a lot of maturity in doing big strategic deals with complex organizations. And Evan was ahead of the curve and very much set the tone for our sales organization in terms of maturation of our articulation of our value proposition. I would take a lot of things that Evan would do in the ways that he would translate how a feature equals reduction in cost, increase in revenue. He just did a really masterful job of some of those things. Another thing that he did really well was at Snowflake, we have a lot of data in terms of the way that our customers use our product. And Evan was the master at being able to look at our internal analytics and to be able to project what the out year forecast would be in terms of our customers' consumption. And he was able to go position that using data with our customers to get them to actually understand, hey, we need to increase our investment.
Could you give us an example of a place where he tied a feature to the actual business outcome in a way nobody else was able to?
A lot of people have figured it out since, but I think he was ahead of the curve. One of the core differentiations is this notion of true separation of storage and compute and true separation of compute from compute, meaning you can have these independent, isolated compute environments, and those can be internal or external to your organization. And so before it was trendy, it's like very much a huge part of the go-to-market motion now, but Evan was very much a pioneer in talking to customers locally and being able to portray that into, hey, you should be thinking about building customer-facing analytics products on top of Snowflake. So rather than thinking about Snowflake as an internal data warehousing product that you would use for corporate internal analytics, how do you go monetize this strategic technology platform, or how do you replatform an existing product where you can reduce your COGS and increase your time to market? I'd say that was kind of a key learning early that he and some other folks on our team really had dialed.
And what was important about customer facing applications?
Yeah, in part because if you think about that value proposition really multiplies when you have more users. And so when you have thousands of people trying to at the same time access the same data, that creates a lot of problems in basically any other technology not named Snowflake in our space. It really just accentuates our value proposition. And then the other piece to that puzzle is that it's also tied to revenue for customers. So it translates to larger opportunities for Snowflake.
The second point that you mentioned, where he was able to project the usage into the future and bring that back to the customer to say, hey, there isn't enough investment going on here. Could you speak more about that?
I'd say that the generic Snowflake rep in 2018 would have gone into a renewal conversation with a customer and said, well, here's how much you bought last year. Like, how much do you want to buy this year? Or there may be some proactive suggestion of what to buy. But Evan and a few other members of our team, Danny Purcell was another person that was really good at being able to really dig into the data and say, well, your month over month growth rates look like this. And they could isolate and say, well, this was a new workload that hasn't hit its full ramp yet. And so you actually need to account for that. And they would open up a discovery conversation and they would use this kind of consumption forecasting conversation with customers as a way to identify, to the benefit of customers, are there other use cases you should be thinking about leveraging Snowflake for? And should we be planning for that? And so it created this great dynamic with our customers such that both the customer and Snowflake would benefit by really road mapping what projects do we need to look at leveraging Snowflake for, and what kind of investment would be required to do that. And does that make sense? Just getting really deep into the granular levels of the data really made a big impact in being able to do that successfully.
How were you able to get into the customer's mind about the roadmap? For example, there is this chunk of usage that is coming from this application, and have you considered other use cases? How did you make that leap? And even just this first application hasn't quite hit production. And so
Yeah.
how did you make that leap?
It's just approaching the conversation more strategically. So if you approach the conversation by saying that, hey, the point of a consumption forecast exercise is really to align and zoom out and help us understand how much data do you have as an organization? What are all the different use cases and where does that data live today? Some of that's in Snowflake, some of it's not. And then just through dialogue, we could uncover and say, wow, you're doing this over there. Well, how's that working? And they say, oh, well, not well, or I have this pain point, or I have this thing that I want to go do. It would open up a dialogue about could Snowflake be a better solution for that? It's the mindset of being a little bit more strategic, a little bit more consultative, really focused on customer outcomes as opposed to a transactional conversation about doing a deal.